I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, it would really be called Wiccan All Along. I mean, seriously. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, we have a heck of an episode for you today. Yes, it is our spoiler-specific episode for Agatha All Along. And with us is creator, writer, showrunner, director, Jac Schaeffer. You, of course, may recognize Jac because we had her way back on WandaVision, which was fun to have. And this obviously is the follow-up to WandaVision, so why not have her back? Why not, I ask you? And I'm glad that we did because I absolutely love this show. Jac was a fantastic interview. And, I got to say, I even got personal in this episode because I thought the level of representation that the MCU achieved finally on television was just near pitch perfect. And it was just great that it was embedded in such a fantastic story with rich characters, and I really love the show. So you will hear me geek out. You will hear me use some questions that have been floating around on the internet, and I barely even had time to get through all my questions. So hopefully maybe down the line in Emmy season, we will interview Jac again. As always, the first part is spoiler-free until we make a distinct spoiler announcement, so you will be warned. You'll know when to stop listening if you somehow haven't finished it yet. So one fun thing to note, there's a companion piece to this podcast in which in Backstory Magazine, we interviewed Jac Schaeffer about episodes 1 through 3. And subscribers could read the entire article now in its entirety, of course. But if you are not a subscriber, you could read a free excerpt of it on the blog at backstory.net. It's about half the article, at least, for free. So that's a good thing as well. And again, we cover episodes 1 through 3 in that article. But without a doubt, Jac Schaeffer was very forthcoming about her creative process and what it took to get this show made. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We turned 12 this year, and we couldn't do it without you. If you've never read us before, you could check out our free issue, which actually happens to be our Avengers Endgame issue for all you Marvel fans out there. And you could read us on a desktop or laptop at backstory.net or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could become a subscriber. And I'm here to give you a discount coupon code that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription just over at backstory.net in your shopping cart. Use code SAVE5. That's save in the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And don't worry, your login from backstory.net will also work on the iPad version as well. As we are in between issues right now, between issue 53 and working on issue 54, we keep adding new content to our magazine. We could do that because we're a digital magazine. So if you're ever curious about what we're doing, you could see our table of contents continue to evolve over at backstory.net. And look, when it comes down to it, I really couldn't have done it without you. So I hope that my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go, it would really mean a lot to me to have you join us as subscribers. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into my interview with creator, writer, showrunner, and director Jac Schaeffer as we discuss Agatha All Along on Disney+. Jac, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming back. I love the show. Absolutely loved it. And so did my kids. And we're going to talk about that. But the easiest place to start, also slightly boring, but you don't have to spend too long on it. But you got 23 Emmy nominations. You won 3 for WandaVision. And basically, Hollywood loves sequels. What was your earliest idea for how you could get back into this universe for what became Agatha All Along?
Yeah. Well, I actually, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me. My earliest ideas, it's sort of Marvel cone of silence. So I can't talk about kind of the paths not taken. But I would say for this show and what it ended up being, the spark that lit the fire was the idea of Agatha Harkness, the most hated witch, diehard covenless witch, having to form a coven. That there would be a narrative imperative that she would have to essentially get a group of sister witches together to go on an adventure. And that felt like it just had so much runway for us.
Well, cool, because I want to get right into the spoilers as fast as we can, but I want to give our folks that are going to press pause when we get to the spoilers one more question. Here's your big non-spoiler question. It's functional, it's logical. Just for the folks that don't know, you're the creator, you're the showrunner, you also are a director on this show, and you didn't take a writing credit on every episode. And I respect that immensely, because that has been an issue in the past for showrunners that sometimes add their names as an additional writer, and you really show that you're respecting your staff with all that. But at the same time, it should be noted that as a showrunner, your fingerprints were throughout and you're collaborating with the staff. If you could you just talk us through your responsibilities as a showrunner and just logistically how that works of assembling your team and then breaking the season together and doing outlines of each episode together, or if people were sent off to do their outlines and then returned to you and then you guys collaborated?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything starts in the room. I of course have a document going into the room, and I have a vision for the show. And I've, on these shows, there's a lot of working with Marvel to get the okay for the launch, and everybody sort of has to have kind of the same sense of essentially what the show is going to be. But the deep work happens in the room, and the staffing process is one of my favorite parts, because I see it as the sort of one part of it is finding my toolbox. Like, what are the different kinds of brains that I need? What are the different types of expertise I need? What are the different life POVs that I need? And then the other side of it is, who are the people I want to be with? What is the culture that we want for this time? I mean, years ago, my husband described it to me as like, you're going on a road trip with these people. Like, you're like 15 hours in a car. Sure. for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so, we have to like each other, and more importantly, we have to have fun with each other, and we have to trust each other. So that those are the sort of like twin flames of my hiring process, is like, what's the brain? What's the person? And I have had the like incredible pleasure and honor working with these terrific writers, some of whom came from WandaVision, some who were new to the room. And yeah, it's very, very collaborative. It is a group think. My job is to pick and choose, and to be the keeper of the vision, and to yes and no stuff, and to keep us on a path, but like keep an ear out for anything that is special and would encourage us to take a detour. It's hard, taxing work, but it's an embarrassment of riches, because these people have incredible ideas. And then, yeah, did you want to know sort of like specifically?
So how many writers were on this season?
Yeah. So this show was 6 writers and a writer's assistant who ended up co-writing an episode. That's great. Then also executive producer Mary Livanos is in the room as well.
How do you decide what episodes you will write, like that you will actually put your name on as a writer?
Yeah. Typically, I'm interested in the pilot and the finale.
Right.
Because the pilot establishes the show, and the finale is where it all, comes together. So I am interested in, the stamp of that. I love the moment of assigning the episodes. It's something I was actually just looking at my notes, and like I start thinking about that very early, like as the episodes start to take shape, which is just like thrilling. It's like an exciting process. It's like sort of watching your children's personalities take shape, like things start to form and gel. And then I start thinking about who is the person best suited to this episode.
Yeah.
And that's always really fun, because they put their imprint on it. They put their soul and their heart on the page. And yes, of course, it goes through my computer. That is how television writing works. That is how show writing works. But it starts with their gifts and their POV.
And so how long did it take you guys to break the outline for what your seasonal arc, or the show Bible, as we would call it, would be?
Gosh, I wish I had reviewed our timeline. I feel like it's like, we have like a sense of it like a month into the room. I think we have deadlines. We have to like turn things in. So you have to turn it like essentially a sketch of like what's called the Bible, which isn't always the Bible, but yeah, I think it's it's terrible. I'm really bad with time and with numbers.
No, it's okay.
Like if you asked me how many days we had per episode, I wouldn't even be able to tell you that. Like once it's done, I forget the pain and agony of deadline.
Well, so once you got the show Bible in, you would obviously revise based on notes, and then you would split up your scripts. Was it always going to be 9 scripts, or did it start off as the more
always
typical?
9. Okay. Yeah. WandaVision was originally 10.
Okay.
And then for both logistical budget reasons and creative reasons, we combined 2 episodes. And so then moving into the show, I wanted it to have the same sort of surface area, real estate, as WandaVision. So it was always going to be 9. We also, at Marvel, there's a lot of pitching, as you go. Like on WandaVision, I was pitching weekly to Kevin. On this one, I wasn't, because his availability wasn't as great as it was on WandaVision, but I was pitching to Brad Winderbaum. And having Mary in the room keeps that channel open. And because what you don't want is to go, really far down a path only to have your, studio say, just a second.
Yeah.
Where are we going with this?
Well, no, you definitely don't want that. I guess we really got to get into the spoilers now, because it's impossible to keep talking without getting into the spoilers. So podcast listeners in Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, if you have not yet seen all the episodes, we're going to get into spoilers. So press pause, go to Disney Plus, watch them, and come back, because we are now in our spoiler section. Right off the top, this should be an easy one, but I'm so curious about it. Rules are important in screenwriting, especially in genre writing. And here we have Agatha, her tactic is to steal the energy of other witches. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, is this for sustenance? Like Agatha cannot live if she doesn't steal this power? Or is it just because she enjoys the power and is, power hungry and likes being the most powerful witch?
I think it is more the latter. I don't think that if she never used her succubus power again, she would die a natural death necessarily. We don't in the show answer the question of how these witches have lived for centuries. It was something that we discussed, and it just, as you say, there were so many rules to establish in this show, so much world building, that certain things we just left as this is how it is. And the witches' ages is one of those things. But she's not a vampire. In order to be a witch who blasts and a witch who can do the sort of like upper tier witchy stuff, she has to succubus. So in my personal understanding of Agatha and her power set, she could just be a witch who practices analog magic if she never used her succubus powers.
Okay. I have a big question for you about something I absolutely love. It's very rare for me to get this personal in a podcast, but it is my experience, and I can't wait to talk to you about this. So first off, I want our listeners to know I asked for permission from my son before discussing this, and he gave me full permission. So I always knew that my son was very likely gay. And in 2020, he came out to us when he was in the 8th grade during lockdowns, which, my wife and I welcomed that with open arms. He has the right to love whoever he wants to love. And so when WandaVision came on in 2021, he, like kids his age, were on TikTok looking at theories. And at a certain point, he discovered that Billy is gay. And after that, it just led him to reading the comics and consuming anything he could about Billy and being obsessed with it. And then, this was while we were still actively watching WandaVision. And during each new subsequent episode, he's like, oh, do you think Billy's going to come out in this episode? I'm like, I don't know, man. There's a lot of heavy lifting going on in this show. Like, I'm not sure that plot's going to come out. But if they're really going toward the Young Avengers, hopefully that is something that comes out. He was convinced that in the Modern Family episode, that was where it was going to happen. Were there ever any plans on WandaVision to let that part of it leak, or was that never on the table?
First of all, I thank you for sharing that story, and that is lovely. And I'm thrilled that your son enjoys these shows. I actually don't know if he's watching Agatha All Along, but
absolutely.
Oh, great.
Every single episode. Yes.
He's a brilliant man. That's wonderful. And yeah, it just fills my heart with joy. That's wonderful. No, it was never ever the plan on WandaVision really, because the children weren't the focus, and the Young Avengers piece wasn't the focus.
Right.
The focus was Wanda's experience as a mother. So those children, Billy and Tommy, weren't like fully fleshed out characters necessarily. We wanted their power sets to get in there. We had notions of them, what their personalities were, and we had discussions in the room of how they interacted with each other. And so we did work to talk about them, and we certainly had awareness of Billy/William/Wiccan's origin and that he was gay. And so it informed our treatment of him. But the sort of larger unpacking of the two of them as characters, we knew that we wouldn't be spending a lot of time on that.
Well, so that's my next question. I mean, because truly, as a parent, representation is important. And I cannot thank you enough. My son's 17 and a half right now. And the minute Joe Locke was cast, he's like, oh my God, they've got to be going for it. They've got to be going for Wiccan. And the gay subplot, there's no chance that they won't because of Heartstoppers, which Joe Locke was in. He was so excited. And, the question was, when is the reveal going to happen? You did that very funny thing when the welcome home sign fell and the W is just sitting there. And so I'm curious about talking about allowing that into this season because, previously Marvel, you had Joe Russo in Endgame being represented as gay. You had one of the characters in Eternals, as we know, represented as gay. And here you did a great representation, both for the Billy Wiccan, idea, but also with Agatha and with Rio having a past. And it was great to see you be able to show that as the flavoring and the texture of the characters. And it was just part of the show as a normal thing. And there could have been an alternate reality. I would have hated it where that didn't become as prominent and wasn't in there. Mm-hmm. What was it like to navigate that and to figure out how you wanted to allow Billy to be a fully realized gay character?
Thank you for all of that. And also I'm sort of sorry to say, but also it's really great to say that the W that stays up with the welcome coven, that was an accident. That was not intentional.
Really?
Yes, but we embrace it. We call whenever that kind of thing happens, we just say it's witchy. It's witchy. That was witchy. Everybody, that was witchy. So I love that fans have sort of latched on to that as a thing because it's a happy accident. Yeah. So I hired folks in the room who would provide the necessary POV for a show that we were hoping would have at least one queer storyline. At the outset, we didn't really know where it was going, but in terms of Agatha's history with Rio, but we knew we were committed to featuring Billy as he is in the comics, which is, in canon, he is a gay character. So, and he is also a Jewish character. And so these were things that we were all committed to bringing into the show. So, one of the writers that I hired, Jason Rostovsky, I hired him because I had this sense that he would be my Billy whisperer. He has sort of the voice of Billy and a lot of sort of personal history overlap. He's a horror fan. He's a wonderful, sensitive, very funny person. And so I needed that in the room and I hired him. And then I hired other members of the LGBTQ community because of our hopes for the show. When we were doing our witch research, I learned that my team might have known this before me, but I learned in sort of more stark relief the overlap of the queer community and the history of witches. And I saw much more clearly the sort of synergy between those two communities, not just in sort of being othered and persecuted, but in the theatricality and the tribalism and the focus on ritual and the focus on the sort of performance and physical representation. And so it all felt so right. And I took their lead, my colleagues in the room, on how we wanted to approach the queer storylines. And the prevailing philosophy was this is a vital, necessary part of the identity of these characters, but it is not the full story. It is not the point of what we're doing. They sort of see it, a lot of them are sort of optimistic and see things in a wonderful way. And they felt that and I agree, that we're past that moment of sort of in a really literal way championing a gay character overtly and saying, this is acceptable. It is much more about this is lived in. And something that was really important to the writers as well was that the Kaplans would be warm, loving parents, that they would be accepting of their child, and that we wouldn't have to see that acceptance verbalized literally on screen, that it would just be part of the texture of their family home life. And some of the writers expressed to me that they found that very healing, that this was the kind of representation that they were craving. And I'm really, I'm thrilled and I'm proud. And I credit the performers for bringing their beauty and their talents and their subtlety and their own sort of moral compass to the screen.
Yeah. I mean, literature is always more advanced than film and television because they're able to get it out there without spending millions and millions of dollars, right? It's somebody's idea. So, for years I've been helping him curate, because it's not my specialty, but I've certainly helped become an expert on it, helped curate what comics had gay superhero characters. And obviously Young Avengers was a place to turn to. And I guess I would ask a question I don't know if you could answer, but the kids brought it up because somehow I missed it. But his boyfriend's name is technically
it's Eddie on the show.
Sorry, Eddie on the show, but Teddy
in the comics
is Hulkling in the comics.
Yes.
And they call him Eddie on the show once after not even referring to him. Sorry, I got that backwards.
No, it's okay.
And it's made them speculate, like, is that actually Hulkling on the show?
Well, so we were calling him Teddy initially because we were sort of in the early stages of the ideation. We wanted a boyfriend, and we wanted. And Teddy is the famous boyfriend from the comics, so we were sort of using Teddy. But then the question of him being Hulkling, the answer for the purposes of our show is that this is not Hulkling for our show. Right. You never know where properties go, so I just want to be clear that for the purposes of our show, this is not. Our Eddie is not Teddy Hulkling from the comics. We ended up using the name Eddie not as sort of a tease, but because Eddie is a person that is close to the production, close to the writer's room. And so it was attributed to that person.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of theories out there because of the similarity of that name, without a doubt.
Now, and who knows? Who knows? That's the thing is, like, tiny things in the MCU, tiny little seeds can blossom into big, beautiful trees. So you never know.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And that the actor that played him was great as well. So
Miles, fabulous. Yeah, really great job. Lovely
actor. Be able to handle it. Well, so I do my own research. I swear I do. But I have another question that only came from the kids. We are also Jewish, and somehow on TikTok they found a rabbi who is talking about the Torah portion at the bar mitzvah for William Kaplan, and how it's about two brothers consumed by fire, which is very point on. And I never would have found that without them. So what could you tell us about picking that portion to talk about the two brothers consumed by fire, because it is very point on?
Yes. So Jason Rostovsky, who wrote the episode, is Jewish. He was very, very sweetly sort of brought his experience with his bar mitzvah, into the room, and all of the sort of cringiness of it, which was like very dear to see him kind of relive that time of his life. But he was very involved in what we featured from the actual bar mitzvah. The woman who plays the rabbi in that scene was also our consultant, and we felt it was important to have a Jewish consultant on the project. To be perfectly honest, I can't remember the sort of sequence of events of choosing that passage, but it was much more Jason and our consultant who sort of led the charge on those things. My agenda was I want it to be correct and respectful. And I know I was thrilled to see that unpacked by the sleuths on the interwebs. It was great.
It was a heck of an Easter egg, because there is no English translation. Like, you're showing the Hebrew, and so people had to be able to read Hebrew to interpret that text.
I know.
And then explain it to the rest of us. But I mean, again, kudos to you, because Stanley was Jewish, and it was always important for him that the Maximos had a Jewish identity. And so this was really well on display here.
It was easy to include, because I just want to say, like, I deserve no cookies. Like, this was something that was in the comics. And then when we got to the room, the Jewish writers in the room spoke of what they felt to be the overlap of their respect for their culture and their experiences as Jewish people, and what we were designing in terms of the witches in the MCU. That there was beauty in the mysticism, in the ritual, in the idea, in the notion of thresholds of crossing, into a new life, a new era, crossing through doors, that there was beauty in the community of it. So it felt very natural, as opposed to something that would be shoehorned in to start with the bar mitzvah. So again, I credit my writers with that.
It was perfect. I mean, like, and you guys really are the first to really bring it forward, which would make Stanley proud, because it was important to him. That brings us, obviously, speaking of relationships, to Agatha and Rio. You have a very interesting foundation, and I know if stuff was cut, you wouldn't be able to speak exactly on some of it, but I'm curious, was there more there? It's good to leave your audience wanting more. And people have speculated as to whether or not there was more of a flashback between them and more of their history.
There was more in the writer's room. There was never any more on the page. It was our story instinct, I would say, that getting too far into their backstory would sort of be too much of a counterweight to the Nikki material. And so we really included what we felt was vital to this chapter. But we certainly talked about it at great length of how they met and what their relationship was and what it looked like in happier times and all of that. And I didn't anticipate that the shippers would be so fervent that there would,
Right.
and I feel foolish for not, you never know how anything is going to land and you never know if people are going to care. And the amount that people care is staggering to me. And it's my hope that in the MCU, there's more unpacking of the Agatha and Rio backstory.
Yeah. I mean, there's a history of who Rio, aka Death, has dated. I mean, she dated Thanos, so
Oh my God.
there's,
I mean, also when you get, Aubrey Plaza,
yeah,
you get Aubrey Plaza inside of the MCU, hold that lady down, keep her in the building.
she was fantastic. You were talking about the shipping group. Was there ever anything about Nicholas's father, or is there any credence to the concept that it could have been born as the love child between these two?
Yes. I mean, we talked about a lot of different versions of who is the father of Nikki. And we ultimately decided that for Agatha's story, it wasn't relevant to the story we were trying to tell. And we didn't really want to get into the weeds of if it was magical or, it's sort of more rules. We certainly considered the idea that Rio is the father. I should ask the writers if they sort of still hold that in their hearts. It's something that I certainly thought about a lot and like to sort of contemplate. I enjoy that it is left to fan interpretation. I also feel that I know how the MCU works, and I don't think it serves anybody to sort of, for me as the creator, to emphatically tell you something that isn't on screen. Because, like I said, it's my hope that these stories continue. So perhaps there is a later chapter that will address this. But I will say that when we were casting, sometimes we were like, does that kid look like Rio? Does that kid look like Aubrey Plaza?
so it's a path that is possible.
Yes. Fans and viewers, yes, I think they're picking up on our brainwaves for sure.
All right. That's good. The Lilia episode that has her death was extraordinary. I mean, every episode had its high moments. That whole episode was just great. Patty was incredible in it. What could you tell us about crafting that episode? It was, again, something that you were using all of the genre staples. And here it was, tarot cards. But you were doing it in a way that was inherent to the story that was being told. And in this case, it was about fate. It was just an extraordinary episode, and great writing, great directing, just great acting, everything about it. What could you tell us about the challenges of crafting it with a message that was that clear, that resonated so much?
Thank you. That's very, very kind. It was really hard to do. That is the truth. That was an extraordinarily challenging episode, but so worthwhile and such a labor of love. I was talking to the writers about it because I was sort of trying to trace the path. It's so hard to remember how it all came together, especially that one, because it's so intensely complicated. Gia King, who's the co-writer on it, she reminded me that she was the first one to kind of present the Slaughterhouse Five idea of it.
Yeah.
And I remember latching onto it the second she and Cam brought it into the room, because it just felt so audacious to create the WandaVision was such a puzzle box show and so challenging in so many ways. And it was my hope that we would sort of take that challenge and try even harder, not in an effort to best WandaVision, but an effort to reward viewers coming from WandaVision. They saw all our tricks in WandaVision, so we got to try harder on this one. And so it just was irresistible to me, the idea of baking the whole puzzle box and then within this intensely complicated show, creating an even more Easter eggy jigsaw. The process, once we sort of had what it was on the page, you were asking about sort of the poignant moments and the messages and the themes of it. There were a lot of messages and themes. We had and a lot of motifs. We had this motif about sight. What do you see, Lilia? We had this motif of age. We had this motif of forgotten woman, remember yourself, and all of those in earlier drafts, and also the sort of tarot of it, because we had her bop flashbacks where she says part of a sentence, and then we had the tarot card, which is a separate thing. So that, believe it or not, is the most streamlined version. Earlier versions had even more, like had even like took each theme farther, and the tarot was more complicated and had more cards and more explanation. And really, once we had the episode on the page, for me, it was about scaling back and scaling back and scaling back and just like what is vital. And I'm so pleased, because there were times where I thought I had cut to the bone, that I maybe was making it too lean, and and it wouldn't have the resonance that it has. But by keeping the script quite trim and focusing on the execution of it, and then leaning on, of course, Patty's performance, and then trusting, my colleagues, David Egan, who edited it, Chris Beck and Michael Paraskevas, who scored it, like it didn't all have to be words, was the lesson. I feel like there's something about it that, I don't know, it's witchcraft. Like it has a spell to it.
There was something really interesting that you did that I think is a great lesson for writers. I mean, rewatchability of anything is always fascinating when it's engineered to have a lot of different levels that you would only notice on your second viewing. And in thinking back on it, you set up Lilia for the first couple episodes up until that point, really all along. We think that she's maybe having episodes of dementia or something like that, because she is the eldest of all of the witches, it seems. She's lived possibly the longest. And that's starting to affect her. But you then learn in that episode that you've seeded this all along, that those are not episodes of dementia. It is her flashing around in time, like, as you say, like Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, in which she's here one moment, gone for a moment, back for a moment. And I thought that was really an extraordinary thing to do. And it really helps for the rewatchability of it as well.
Thank you. I think that really came to the fore with Patty's performance. We wanted, like, sort of in the Barris notion, we wanted a character that was underestimated. We wanted a character that appeared kind of kooky, and like maybe they were there for comedic relief, that you didn't understand in the immediate, that like the fullness of what's really going on and what's underneath. But I think it was Patty who brought a vulnerability to Lilia and a sort of like childlike fear. And I think that's really what gets people. And I think that, anybody who's had any experience with dementia or Alzheimer's, like it is so painful to see a person be lost and to kind of be reduced.
Right.
And to not know where they are and to not know what's going on. And there's something that's undignified about it and tragic. And I think Patty brought that in. And for someone as powerful as Patty, and someone, she is a person that is so entirely in control of her instrument, to find that thread of being adrift. Yeah, to me, it's really primal, and I think I think people really hook into that.
It worked really well. Now, again, not to use too many internet questions here, I think this is the biggest major last one. A lot of people were counting that they saw only 5 bodies die of the Salem 7 when we were in that one shot of the bodies falling upward into the swords. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, it's been on my to-do list to talk to my colleagues and check in with them, and I haven't done that. I did see my assistant, Brittany Horn, who's the designer of the tarot cards, and I was like, were there only 5? Because I haven't looked at it myself. I think it's just sort of in the edit and in the frame. Truthfully, it was not our intention to only have 5, and I think I probably psychologically.
We'll set the record. Do you want to set the record straight? Because I didn't watch it. I still framed it.
I know, I've said it before, the Salem 7 in our show are dead. If no one, like the entire post-production, visual effects, everything, nobody ever raised their hand and said, I only see 5 in the frame. So
I still framed it last night. So I'm glad you have clarified that. We will save some bandwidth for the rest of the world.
Yes.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We turned 12 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. Of course, I hope you're enjoying the podcast, but please remember, in Backstory Magazine, we interviewed Jac Schaeffer in a companion piece that focuses on episodes 1 through 3. Subscribers, of course, could read the entire interview right now, but if you're not a subscriber, you could still join in on the fun, and you could read it on our blog as a free excerpt, which is about half the article. So I hope you check that out as well. It really means a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page to continue supporting my passion project, Backstory Magazine. So I really hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber if you haven't already. If you've never read us, you could check us out at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or of course on our iPad app, Backstory. And you could even test drive us by reading our free issue, which happens to be, for all you Marvel fans out there, an Avengers Endgame issue from a few years back. More than a few, but you know what I'm saying. And look, since we're a digital magazine, we're between issues 53 and 54 right now, and we keep updating issue 53 with new articles of movies and television and comics as they're coming out. So folks, this is independent film journalism, and it is completely subscriber supported. So thanks again for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's jump right back into our conversation with creator, showrunner, writer, and now director Jac Schaeffer as we continue talking about Agatha All Along on Disney Plus. You know, jumping to the most important part, I've interviewed Christopher McQuarrie multiple times, the Oscar-winning screenwriter of Usual Suspects, and I cannot wait for him to see the end of this show.
Oh my gosh!
Because there's something.
So he can point at it and say, "Oh, someone ripping me off yet again."
Hey, it's not ripping off; it's an homage. And by the way, Usual Suspects came out so long ago that
that's the thing. I'm like, the kids don't know this movie.
They absolutely don't. Like, I had to tell my kids, there is a famous movie from the 90s, which, by the way, makes it sound like, for me growing up, somebody's telling me about a movie in the 1950s or something like that. So whatever. But look, you did it right. And it was very appropriate. It was a great way to incorporate it, this concept that Billy had constructed the Witch's Road, which gets us into two different items of discussion. One is that you have this great reveal that the entire song, I want to start with this one, the entire song is a con that Agatha constructed to lure in other witches to go on a journey that she knew didn't exist because she made up the song, which is hilarious, again, for rewatchability. In the episode where they are arguing with Agatha about the lyrics of the song, and she's arguing back because she is the person that created the song, and she can't tell them that. So how did the idea that the Witch's Road was going to be a construct of Wiccans because he felt he needed to go on it, so therefore he made it real, and B, the idea that Agatha knew that the Witch's Road was fake, but is just blown away by the power of this kid, this young punk, to be able to make it fully materialize in front of her and go along for the ride? Because that would be something that I think once you had that idea, the team was riding towards the entire season.
Yes. So the idea that Billy made the road, I came up with like a month into the writer's room. And I've been trying to trace how the piece of it of Nikki came up with the ballad and it was a long con. I asked the writers and I tried to look at the notes, and it's sort of, I feel like it's a testament to the groupthink that I can't quite track how that happened. We were doing such deep work on the Nikki storyline, on the ballad as a spell. My whole intention for the show was that the show itself be a spell. That's what I kept saying to my writers. That was the headline of what we were doing. And I think the idea of the ballad being the spell that opens the road was born of that. And of course, music is a spell. So I can't like untangle the sort of the when and the how, but it was the idea that it was Agatha's lie that Billy made true. That was the thing that we grabbed onto, especially because sort of in the binary of it, Agatha's the villain, Billy's the hero, the idea of Agatha as liar, Billy as truthful. And then it was always my intention that the end of the show would be Agatha behind it all in some way. Like we're like, Agatha is casting some kind of a spell that everyone is under, including the audience. And this felt like a way to do that it wasn't in fact a literal witchcraft spell. It was a con. It was a lie. But she leveraged a lie and into a spell over the whole audience. That was the thing that spurred me forward to go with the idea that Billy had made the road. Like, I found it very heartbreaking, the idea that underneath it all, it really, truthfully, it's Nikki all along. He's the one who came up with the original ballad. And that seemed to me to be just very small and very sweet and moving, which is, I sort of get a thrill out of very little human poignant ideas being the ultimate crux of a Marvel story. I just think that that's that is a real magic trick.
And also for the reveal, for how Billy physically made the road come to life was really interesting.
Like you mean the sequence where he puts it together?
Yeah. In his room and realizing that those witches that died, he has responsibility for.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, for once, not entirely Agatha, which was interesting. What were the challenges of that, of making it all coalesce? Because, you know, you have everything from the little bronze shoes, and there was a comment of like, oh, what do you want to do with those shoes? Bronze them? So that comes back. Was there anything that you wanted to do that was just too convoluted, that maybe didn't make it into the final reveal, but that was an idea that was on your vision board the whole time?
Oh my gosh. How much time do you have? There's so many millions of things that I wish we could have done and could have made good on. And that's one of the painful things about this process, and difficult things about my job specifically, is a lot of my job is no. A lot of my job is having the strength to resist a good idea if it doesn't fit in the puzzle. And sometimes I make mistakes. Sometimes there are things I look at the show and things I wish I had done differently, or we had delivered more on, or didn't spend time on, and you never know what audience reaction is going to be. And so like that adds a whole color. So it's very, very hard.
Was there an item you remember? Was there a poster on a wall that you remember? Something that didn't make it?
Yeah, not specifically about Billy's room. We had an idea that Nikki was buried on the road. And there was something that I felt was really poetic about that everybody was after a different thing. And we think Agatha's after, her power, but we had this idea that there was something that she buried with him that she needed, but really it was him, that there was those kinds of like more poetic ideas. We also had a number of ideas about the road that we had to abandon when we knew that the road had never existed before. So we had created a lot of history about the road. And so, some of that had to fall away. Them taking their shoes off was something that I wish we had a way to sort of like explain. For us, it was very intuitive. It was a sign of respect. And then like, as we were looking at cuts, people were like, why'd they take their shoes off? So then I asked the end titles folks to put a line, like that first book that comes up says something about taking your shoes off. Cause I was like, we never got this into dialogue in the right moment. So, because he says it later, he says it in 8, but that's pretty late.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing. It's like justifying getting things in. Yeah. If I could go through my notes, we would have about 6 days of talking about the thing.
Well, we could do that another time. The sacrifice that Agatha makes, it's unexpected, right? Because she's very selfish. She is a covenless witch. And I would love to hear about the emotional building that you were doing to bring her to that point. Obviously, she enjoys Billy, aka Wiccan, as kind of someone she could mentor, and the son she never got to continue hanging out with. That's one level to it. She's amazed by his power. That's certainly another level to it. What could you tell us about that moment of sacrifice when she does go for the kiss after saying that, you could have him, you could have him. She turns her back because, in MCU terms, it's kind of like Hawkeye and Black Widow, this emotional scene of which one of them is going to be sacrificed, and it's their choice. It's no one else's choice but theirs.
In that instance, both Hawkeye and Natasha want to sacrifice.
Right.
And we know that. From my reading of, what we put on the page, what Peter Cameron wrote and what Catherine performed, I think that Agatha is trying to sort of con and manipulate herself into being the survivor the whole time. And then at the last clinch moment, impulsively sacrifices herself. I think she is someone who is constantly thinking and calculating all of the time, every second that she is awake, and probably when she's asleep too. And so I think what is specific about this moment and the way she sort of lunges at Rio, and it's a kiss, and kisses are so often impulsive, it is about undeniable attraction. I think that the sacrifice here it's like a reflex. It's like a knee-jerk response. She's not actually thinking it through, which I think makes it pure and truthful.
It brings us to the concept of Agatha, right? the ghost version, as they say, of Agatha. And it's also a rule question for you of who gets to come back as a ghost. Obviously, on the road, she encountered her own mother as a ghost. So we've seen this already in the series up to this point. When did that idea come about of her coming back as a ghost mentor, aka Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a million other such examples going back?
Sure.
When did that come about, and what was it like writing it?
So it was an idea that we always wanted from before the writers' room. It was part of the understanding with Marvel of what we were going to do with the show. Is that the agreement was we were going to, we had sort of like several things we were going to do. We were going to define witchcraft in the MCU. We were going to bring Billy Maximoff into the MCU, and we were going to essentially, for the purposes of this show, sunset Agatha as a ghost and spirit guide to Billy Maximoff. So it was always the plan. And it felt very right because of the comics and because of, how much time she spends in the comics being a ghost. I forget, what was the other part of your question?
Well, it's just once you realized she was going to become a ghost, what was important about the rule of her being allowed to become a ghost? Because Lilia doesn't, so far as we've seen, Lilia is not a ghost.
We spent a lot of time talking about what are our ghost rules. We had big conversations. It was always the thing at the top of my to-do list as I was, revising and changing and honing. And ultimately, it felt like it would be something that could be intuitive. We have one line. Lilia says ghosts have unfinished business, which is not specific to the MCU. I would argue that is a specific notion of human life on this planet. The idea,
and especially the lore of ghosts.
Yes. And so we were going to sort of bake our own rules and have ghosts be MCU-y in whatever way. And it felt like too much and tacked on. And I also felt like it tipped our hand, like if we spent a lot of our Evanora ghost time talking about ghost rules, I felt that people would be like, oh, we're learning this now so that it makes sense when Agatha becomes a ghost later. So we only have that line, ghosts have unfinished business, and then we hear that Rio hates ghosts. We had other dialogue for her to sort of, unpack why does she hate ghosts and what does that mean? And we cut it because it just seemed like we could sort of cruise on everyone's visceral understanding of spirits, the idea of not being able to let go of this plane. And so the reason the other witches, aren't ghosts is because they don't have any unfinished business. They went through their trials, they reached acceptance in different forms, and they moved on. That doesn't necessarily mean that we won't ever see them again inside of the MCU, but it is why we had Agatha become a ghost because, of all the characters in the show, she did not complete her arc. I think that she has grown and changed, but she didn't go from villain to hero. She went from villain to a villain who's opened her heart to partnering with someone.
Well, and of course, obviously, it's innate that, of course, death hates ghosts because they've, in a way, cheated death. Like they haven't fully been shipped away. I guess that brings me to another question about Rio. Was there ever a trial for Rio? Because for everyone on the road, I easily could have seen there been something, even though we don't know that she is Rio, aka Death. But was there ever a trial that she had to go through even in a perfunctory fashion?
No, there was never a trial for Rio. I mean, in my mind, she doesn't need a trial. Yes, she's a witch, but she's sort of on a separate plane from anyone else. And I think there's an argument that she isn't a part of the coven. We also, we spent a lot of time on like, what are the rules of the coven? Do you need, and that felt a little too Marvel-y. Like it felt like we were working too hard to be like, a coven has this many people and a coven has these skill sets and a coven is forever or a coven is only for a time. It just was important to us that we care about these women and we care about them together. And so I think that with Rio, Agatha calls her a tourist, and I think that's correct. I think that she is part of this journey and part of this path, but she didn't need a trial because it's not about her personal growth. The thing that she needed to really reconcile with is that Agatha, in this chapter, Agatha says no to her.
I mean, it's interesting. It's great to see that Jin got to live. So that she could go on to do other great things, and there's Marvel storylines about her. Was Jen always going to live, or was
no? It was a very long, ongoing conversation about who lives and who dies. I had sort of looked at it as like either everyone dies or everyone lives. And then once we decided that there would be real death, permanent death inside of the show, it suddenly occurred to me that not everyone had to die, and it seemed really so right to me that Jen be the one to live. I think because we felt she had the longest runway. We meet her at a point where she is so the opposite of who she used to be. Alice just never achieved her potential, and Lilia was hiding from her potential. But Jen had sort of gone backwards and was hurting people. All of her whole value system had become inverted. Yeah. And so to see her not only return to herself, but become better and stronger. Yeah, I personally, and once Sashir was cast, like I wanted to see her ride off into the sunset. And so that's what we gave her.
It was great that she did. A rules question. The William Kaplan concept here is interesting because it is in the comics. There's a lot in the comics. Wanda sometimes forgets about her kids and they disappear. They've been adopted. Like lots of different things have happened. My rule question here about William Kaplan is, does Wiccan have William Kaplan's memories, like as part of who he is, assuming?
Yeah. I mean, I believe that there's a bit of that question that is a little up for interpretation. We talked a lot about there being some sort of mystical intermingling of the two of them. But more than anything, we felt it was fated that William Kaplan was a boy who was, really into magic, who was gay, who was all of these things that Billy Maximoff is, that there is like overlap in their identities. But yes, that William had died and Billy had occupied this body is sort of the cleanest way of looking at it. At this point in this story, Billy Maximoff doesn't have memories of William Kaplan and has very few memories of Billy Maximoff. And that's part of what's been so difficult, in his journey in this particular chapter. I'm hopeful that if he moves forward in the MCU, that there can be more sort of unpacking of the William Kaplan Billy Maximoff part of the story and the Kaplans, Jeff and Rebecca specifically.
That's great. Was there ever any plan for Wanda to show up briefly?
No.
Okay, no. Okay. Well, so then my last big question for you is, what was your toughest scene? What was the toughest scene for you as a writer that you remember coming back to the script, trying to recrack over and over again? And by the way, I cannot say this enough. You did a fantastic job as a director on the show. You could also throw in something differently as a director if you want to. I'm happy to hear both, but toughest scene as a writer, first and foremost.
I would say there are two. Okay, there are three. The final scene was really hard. Ending a Marvel show or a Marvel movie is always the hardest part. So that took the longest. We shot it last. I'm pleased with where it landed, but it had a lot of different versions that were not right. So that would probably be the number one. The battle was in 108 was excruciating. Poor Peter Cameron delivered so many versions of that I didn't want to do because I don't really like the big battles. And he came up with really incredible ideas like Sparky's skeleton coming up from the backyard and fighting everybody. It was really, really great. But he always got the kiss right and he always got Agatha's death right. And that was our North Star. And so we eventually found it. And there were discoveries in post. So it wasn't on the page. That was a sequence that changed in the writing era of post-production. And then Rio's little speech by the campfire was really hard. So Giovanna Sarkis wrote a beautiful monologue that was quite long. And then it was one of those things that on the day Aubrey was doing it and it wasn't Aubrey's fault, but it just wasn't clicking. It didn't feel right for what Aubrey had brought to the role. There's so much economy in what Aubrey does, she accomplishes so much with her physicality and her very being that this long speech just felt wrong to me. And I changed it on the day, which is always a risk. I changed it in the moment. And she is my scar. I came up with watching her do that.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. Well, I cannot tell you how absolutely much in love I am of this show along with my entire family. And I know that there's fans out there that we've seen just absolutely love it as well. You really stuck the landing without a doubt. Thank you for being so generous with your time. And I can't wait to have you back to talk more about it or your next project. Thanks again, Jac.
Thank you so much. Please give my best to your family and your son in particular. I'm so pleased that he's loving the show. It's great.
Absolutely. He's a theater geek, so he loved seeing all the great lighting in the show as well.
We love the theater nerds. We love them.
He's a theater nerd applying to college, so that's our next adventure. Well, thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to creator, writer, showrunner, and now director Jac Schaeffer for being so generous with her time and chatting about Agatha All Along, which you could watch on Disney+. And folks, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also consider becoming a subscriber to Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. So one fun thing to note, there's a companion piece to this podcast in which in Backstory Magazine, we interviewed Jac Schaeffer about episodes 1 through 3. And subscribers could read the entire article now. But if you are not a subscriber, you could read a free excerpt of it on the blog at backstory.net. It's about half the article, at least, for free. So that's a good thing as well. And again, we cover episodes 1 through 3 in that article. If you've never read us before, you could check out our free issue, which happens to be an Avengers Endgame issue. So all you Marvel fans will definitely enjoy that. You could read us on a desktop or laptop at backstory.net or on our iPad app, Backstory. So look, we are independent entertainment journalism and we are subscriber based. So it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could watch all these Zoomcasts of me interviewing the folks that you're listening to. It would really mean a lot to me to have you join us as subscribers. So thanks for considering. And don't forget, you could always use discount coupon code SAVE5 at your checkout at backstory.net, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And then you could then use your login to log into our iPad app. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2024. All rights reserved. Folks, I'm pretty easy to find if you want to drop me a line. Feel free to get in touch on social media, on Twitter as Yo Goldsmith or as Backstory_mag. Those same handles work on Instagram, Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. I also have a Facebook fan page, or you could even email me at backstoryletters@gmail.com. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.